The ballot box sat innocently on Margaret Chen's kitchen table, but inside lay evidence of the most brazen election fraud her quiet suburban neighborhood had ever seen. 300 phantom votes that would destroy lives, expose decades of corruption, and turn her own HOA board against her in ways she never imagined possible. Margaret Chen had always been the type of person who read every line of her HOA bylaws twice. At 52, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and reading glasses perpetually perched on her nose, she treated her role as HOA treasurer with the same meticulous attention she'd given to her 30-year career as a forensic accountant, which is exactly why the numbers didn't add up. "Something's wrong with these voter registrations," she muttered, spreading printouts across her dining room table like a crime scene investigator laying out evidence. The October rain hammered against her windows as she cross-referenced addresses. With county records for the third time that evening, her husband David looked up from his laptop, concern creasing his weathered face. "Margaret, it's past midnight. Can't this wait until David? Look at this." Her voice carried an edge he hadn't heard since she'd uncovered embezzlement at her old firm. "We have 847 registered voters for tomorrow's election, but our neighborhood only has 547 homes." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. "Maybe some people registered twice by mistake," David offered weakly, but even he didn't sound convinced. Margaret's phone buzzed, a text from Harold Pemberton, the HOA president. "Everything ready for tomorrow. Remember, we're counting on your discretion." Her blood chilled. Discretion about what? The next morning, Margaret arrived at the community center 30 minutes before the polls opened. The familiar scent of coffee and cleaning supplies did nothing to calm her racing heart. Harold was already there, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, directing volunteers with the authority of a general commanding troops. Margaret, right on time. His smile was too wide, too practiced. "I've already set up the ballot collection." Very straightforward process today. But Margaret's trained eye immediately spotted the irregularities. 2 separate ballot boxes instead of the usual one. A stack of pre-marked ballots sitting suspiciously close to Harold's station, and most damning of all, a list of names she'd never seen before. Names that matched the phantom voter registrations. "Harold," she said carefully, "why do we need 2 ballot boxes?" His face flickered for just a moment, a micro-expression of panic that disappeared so quickly she almost missed it. "Efficiency, my dear. We're expecting a large turnout." But Margaret had counted every resident in their 547-home community. She knew exactly how many people should be voting. And it wasn't 847. As the morning progressed, Margaret watched Harold's operation with growing horror. Every 20 minutes, he would disappear into the storage room with the second ballot box. When he emerged, it was always fuller than when he'd taken it in. Meanwhile, his wife Janet worked the check-in table, marking off names from the mysterious extended voter list. Names like Robert Chen at Margaret's own address. Though she lived alone with David, Margaret approached the check-in table during a lull. "I notice you marked off Robert Chen as voting, but that's my address, and there's no Robert Chen living there." Janet's hand froze over the clipboard. "Oh, that must be ... your tenant." "I don't have a tenant." The 2 women stared at each other across a chasm of unspoken accusations. Janet's eyes darted toward Harold, who was watching them intently from across the room. "Perhaps you should speak with Harold about any concerns," Janet said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, but Margaret was already moving, her forensic accountant's instincts kicking into overdrive. She needed evidence, not confrontation. During the lunch break, while Harold and Janet stepped outside, she photographed the voter lists, the ballot boxes, and most crucially, the storage room where Harold had been making his mysterious trips. What? She found there made her hands shake as she held her phone's camera steady. Boxes of pre-marked ballots, stacks of fake voter registration forms, and a ledger in Harold's handwriting detailing a scheme that went back 5 years, a systematic election fraud that had kept the same board members in power while they drained the HOA's reserves into their own pockets. The numbers told a story of greed and corruption that made her stomach turn. Inflated maintenance contracts going to Harold's brother's company, emergency repairs that never happened, assessment increases that lined their pockets while residents struggled with rising costs. But as Margaret photographed the evidence, She heard footsteps in the hallway. Harold's voice, getting closer. "I thought I saw someone go into the storage room." Margaret's heart hammered as she quickly pocketed her phone and grabbed a random box of supplies, trying to look like she belonged there. But when Harold appeared in the doorway, his expression told her everything she needed to know. He knew that she knew. "Margaret," Harold said softly, stepping into the storage room and closing the door behind him. "I think we need to have a conversation." The overhead fluorescent light flickered ominously as Margaret realized she was alone in a windowless room with a man who had just caught her documenting his crimes. The evidence of 5 years of fraud surrounded them like a paper fortress, and Harold's friendly mask had finally slipped completely. "You always were too thorough for your own good," he continued, moving closer. "Janet warned me you might become a problem, but I hoped you'd understand the bigger picture, the sacrifices we've made to keep this community running smoothly." Margaret's hand tightened around her phone, the evidence literally burning in her pocket. "Sacrifices. Harold, you've stolen over $200,000 from our neighbors, families who trusted you." Harold's laugh was cold, bitter. "Trust, Margaret? You have no idea what it takes to manage a community like this. The real decisions, the hard choices, like rigging elections, like ensuring stability, like making sure the right people stay in power to protect everyone's investments." His voice dropped to a whisper. "But now you've seen too much, and I can't let you destroy everything we've built." The door clicked shut behind Harold with a sound like a coffin closing. Margaret's mind raced as Harold moved closer, his friendly neighbor facade completely abandoned. The storage room suddenly felt like a tomb, fluorescent lights humming overhead like electronic vultures. But 30 years of forensic accounting had taught her to stay calm under pressure, and she'd dealt with desperate embezzlers before. "Harold, think about what you're doing," she said steadily, backing toward the supply shelves. "People know I'm here. David expects me home. You can't just—" "Can't what?" Harold's voice was eerily calm now. "Margaret, you've stumbled into something much bigger than you realize. This isn't just about our little HOA. There are investors, development deals, people who've paid good money to ensure this election goes a certain way." Margaret's blood turned to ice. "What investors?" Harold smiled, and for the first time she saw the real man behind the community leader mask, calculating. "Ruthless and completely without remorse. Pemberton Development Group, my son's company. They've been buying up properties through shell companies, planning a major development, but they needed the HOA board to approve zoning variances to vote down resident protections." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The mysterious emergency assessments that had forced elderly residents to sell their homes at below-market prices. The sudden changes to community rules that seemed to benefit outside buyers. The board meetings where residents' objections were systematically ignored. "You've been driving people out of their own neighborhood," Margaret whispered. "I've been securing everyone's future. Property values are going to triple once the development goes through. The remaining residents will thank me. The remaining residents, Harold, there are families here who've lived in this community for 30 years. Children who grew up, children grow up and move away. Margaret, but money is forever." Margaret's phone suddenly buzzed with a text notification. Harold's eyes immediately locked onto her pocket. "Give me the phone, Margaret." "No, I'm not asking." The tension stretched between them like a wire about to snap. Margaret could hear voices outside, other volunteers returning from lunch, if she could just stall long enough. "You know what's funny, Harold?" she said, forcing her voice to stay conversational. "I've been tracking financial irregularities for 3 decades, and you made every mistake in the book." Harold paused, curiosity flickering across his face despite himself. "You kept records of everything, every fake voter registration cross-referenced. With property purchases, every inflated contract tied directly to your family members. You built a perfect paper trail of your own crimes, your bluffing." Margaret pulled out her phone, holding it just out of Harold's reach. "Am I check your ledger again? Page 12. You wrote down the exact amounts your son's company paid you for each zoning approval. Page 23 has the vote tallies from the last 3 rigged elections, including how many fake ballots you added each time." Harold's face went ashen. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I've been investigating you for 6 months, Harold. Ever since Mrs. Patterson came to me, crying because she couldn't afford the sudden assessment increase that forced her to sell to a cash buyer who turned out to be one of your son's shell companies. The storage room door suddenly rattled. Harold, Margaret. Is everything okay in there? It was Janet's voice, high-pitched with worry. Harold's head snapped toward the door, and in that split second of distraction, Margaret made her move. Darted past him toward the door, but Harold grabbed her wrist. You're not going anywhere until we figure this out. Let go of me. Their struggle knocked over a stack of boxes, sending fake ballots scattering across the floor like confetti at a corrupt celebration. The sound echoed through the storage room, and suddenly the door burst open. Janet stood there, mouth agape. At the chaos, behind her, 3 other volunteers peered in, their faces registering shock at the scene. Harold gripping Margaret's wrist, hundreds of pre-marked ballots scattered on the floor, and the open ledger displaying years of documented fraud. Harold, Janet whispered, what have you done? But Margaret was already moving. She pulled free from Harold's grip and stepped over the scattered evidence toward the door. Janet, call the police. Now, don't you dare, Harold roared. Janet, she's trying to destroy our community. She's our community. Margaret spun around, her voice cutting through his protests like a blade. Harold, you've been systematically destroying this community for 5 years. Mrs. Patterson isn't the only one. The Johnsons, the Kowalskis, the elderly couple on Maple Street, all forced out by your manufactured financial crises so your son could buy their properties for pennies on the dollar. The volunteers in the doorway gasped. Margaret recognized them longtime residents who'd watched neighbors disappear one by one, never understanding why. That's not Harold started, but Margaret wasn't finished. And the development deal. Harold, your son's company isn't planning to build luxury. Homes have seen the real plans. Industrial warehouses. Your son is going to turn our neighborhood into a logistics hub, and you've been helping him drive out every family who might object. The silence that followed was deafening. Janet sank against the doorframe, her face pale. Harold, tell me she's lying. Tell me you didn't. Harold's expression had shifted again. The panic was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous: cold calculation. Margaret, he said quietly, you have no idea what you've just done. This goes beyond our neighborhood, beyond our state. There are people involved in this who don't forgive, and they don't forget. Margaret felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. What are you talking about? Harold smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Check your voter registration records again. But this time, look at the state Senate district. Look at the congressional district. Look at every local election in the past 5 years. Margaret's mind raced. If Harold's fraud operation wasn't limited to their HOA, you're not the only forensic accountant who's gotten curious about irregularities, Margaret, but you might be the first one stupid enough to confront me directly. The implication hit her like a physical blow. Other accountants, other investigators, other people who'd gotten too close to the truth. What happened to them, Harold? Accidents happen. People relocate for work. Sometimes they just disappear from public records entirely. Margaret's phone rang, making everyone jump. The caller ID showed David's number, but when she answered, a stranger's voice came through the speaker. Mrs. Chen, we have your husband. The phone trembled in Margaret's hands as the anonymous voice continued, calm and professional, as a customer service representative discussing billing issues. Mrs. Chen, your husband is safe, for now, but you've involved yourself in matters that require ... discretion. Margaret's world tilted. The storage room, the scattered fake ballots, Harold's cold smile. Everything suddenly felt surreal, like she'd stumbled into someone else's nightmare. Who are you? What do you want? I represent certain interests that have invested heavily in various development projects across the region. Your husband is currently in protective custody while we discuss terms. Let me talk to him. That's not possible at the moment, but I can offer you proof of life. The sound of muffled movement came through the phone. Then David's voice, stressed but unharmed, Margaret, don't give them anything. Whatever they want, don't. The line went quiet, except for the mysterious caller's breathing. As you can see, Mr. Chen is unharmed. He'll remain that way as long as you're reasonable. Now, I understand you've discovered some irregularities. In your local election process, Margaret looked around the storage room. Janet was crying silently. The volunteers stood frozen in shock, and Harold watched her with the satisfied expression of a chess player who'd just announced checkmate. "This is bigger than Harold's fraud, isn't it?" Margaret said. "Much bigger. Your HOA is one of 47 communities across 3 states participating in our development initiative. We've invested over $50 million in property acquisitions, zoning changes, and infrastructure preparations. Your curiosity threatens to unravel years of careful planning." Margaret's forensic accountant brain processed the implications rapidly. 47 communities, millions of dollars, multiple states. This wasn't just election fraud. It was a coordinated conspiracy to manipulate local governments across an entire region. "What do you want me to do?" "Simple. Finish today's election. As planned, certify the results. Continue serving as HOA treasurer. Forget what you've seen, and if I refuse..." The pause stretched for an eternity before the voice returned. "Colder now, Mrs. Chen. Accidents happen to people who interfere with business operations. Houses catch fire. Cars have brake failures. People slip in their bathtubs." But Margaret had spent 3 decades investigating financial crimes, and she recognized something the voice had missed, a crucial detail that changed everything. "You made one mistake," she said steadily. Harold's confident expression flickered. "You assumed I was working alone, but I'm a forensic accountant, and we never investigate without backup protocols. Everything I've discovered, every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence has already been uploaded to a secure server with automatic distribution triggers." The silence on the phone was telling. "If I don't check in every 6 hours with a specific code, all evidence gets automatically sent to the FBI, the state attorney general, the IRS, and every major news outlet in the region. So threatening me isn't just useless, it's counterproductive." Harold's face went white. "Margaret, what have you done?" "What I do best, Harold. I followed the money. All of it. Every fake voter registration tied to property purchases. Every shell company connected to your son's development group. Every local official who's been taking payoffs to approve zoning variances." She held up her phone. "And I documented everything with the same obsessive detail you used to plan this fraud." The anonymous caller's voice returned, no longer calm. "Mrs. Chen, you're making a serious mistake." "No. I made a serious mistake 5 years ago when I trusted Harold Pemberton to manage our community finances honestly. But I won't make the mistake of backing down now." Margaret looked directly at Harold. "You want to know the really beautiful part? While you were busy rigging elections and intimidating neighbors, I was doing what forensic accountants do, following audit trails. Your son's development company. It's been taking federal subsidies for affordable housing projects while secretly planning to build industrial warehouses. That's federal fraud, the kind that carries 20-year prison sentences." Harold grabbed for the phone, but Margaret stepped back. "Oh, and Harold, your mysterious investor friends. They're about to become very unhappy with you, because in about 10 minutes, every law enforcement agency in the region is going to receive detailed evidence of a multi-state conspiracy involving racketeering, election fraud, and federal housing subsidy violations." "You're bluffing, Harold," said desperately. Margaret smiled. "Am I, Janet? What time is it?" Janet checked her watch with trembling hands. 2:15. "Perfect. At 2:30, my automatic evidence distribution activates unless I enter the cancellation code. But here's the thing, I'm not going to cancel it." The phone erupted with the anonymous caller's voice, no longer controlled. "Mrs. Chen, if you release that information, your husband will be safely in FBI protective custody within the hour, along with me and every other witness to your conspiracy. Because I didn't just document the fraud, I recorded this entire conversation." Margaret held up her phone, showing the recording app that had been running since the call began. "Federal agents have been listening to every word you've said. Kidnapping, conspiracy, threatening a federal witness. You just confessed to enough. Felonies to spend the rest of your life in prison." The storage room door burst open as FBI agents flooded in, weapons drawn and badges visible. "Harold Pemberton, you're under arrest." "Janet Pemberton, you're under arrest." Everyone else, hands visible, "Do not move." As handcuffs clicked around Harold's wrists, he stared at Margaret in disbelief. "How did you, ... when did you, ... double quotes, when did I call the FBI?" 6 months ago, Harold, The day Mrs. Patterson showed me the foreclosure papers that didn't match her actual financial situation. When did I start recording our conversations? 3 months ago, when you first mentioned how some problems just disappear. Margaret watched as federal agents led Harold away, his empire of fraud crumbling around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. Through the community center windows, she could see more agents surrounding unmarked vehicles, arresting Harold's co-conspirators throughout the neighborhood. Her phone rang again. This time, David's actual voice came through clearly. "Margaret, the FBI agents say, I can come home now. Are you okay?" "I'm perfect," she said, looking around the storage room full of evidence that would expose years of corruption. "And Harold, your development deal is dead. Those 47 communities you mentioned, they're all getting new, honest elections. And every family you forced out is getting their homes back at fair market value, plus damages." As Margaret walked out of the community center, she passed the ballot boxes that had started this entire investigation. Inside were the 300 fake votes that Harold thought would secure his power forever. Instead, they'd become the evidence that brought down the largest election fraud conspiracy in state history. 6 months later, Margaret received a letter from Mrs. Patterson, who'd moved back into her old house after the courts reversed the fraudulent foreclosure. "Thank you for proving that sometimes one person really can make a difference," it read. "Our community is finally home again." Margaret smiled and filed the letter carefully in her records. After all, a forensic accountant never throws away evidence, especially evidence that justice, when properly documented and systematically pursued, always wins in the end. The final count: 47 communities freed from corruption, fake votes exposed, millions in damages recovered, and one very satisfied forensic accountant who'd proven that the most powerful weapon against fraud isn't force or threats, it's simply refusing to let criminals hide their crimes in plain sight.